Somewhere in your house, right now, there is a muscle quietly disappearing. You cannot feel it happening. There is no pain, no warning sign, no moment where your body sits you down and says, "Today, you lost a little more of yourself." And yet, by the time most people notice it, in a stumble on the stairs, in a knee that buckles getting out of a chair, in legs that suddenly feel like they belong to someone 20 years older, the damage has already been building for years. So here is the question worth sitting with for a moment. If your body were losing something this important, wouldn't you expect it to hurt? Wouldn't you expect some kind of alarm? The unsettling truth is that it doesn't work that way, and understanding why is the first step to stopping it before it takes something you can never fully get back. This is the story of sarcopenia, the medical term for age-related muscle loss, and more specifically, the story of what happens to the muscles in your legs, the ones responsible for nearly everything that makes independence possible. Walking to the mailbox, standing up from a couch, catching yourself before a fall, climbing a single step without thinking twice. These are not small conveniences. They are the entire architecture of a free and capable life, and they rest almost entirely on muscle tissue that begins shrinking far earlier than most people realize. Here is the part that surprises almost everyone the first time they hear it. Muscle loss does not begin at 70 or even 60. Research on aging and skeletal muscle shows that after the age of 30, the average adult begins losing a measurable percentage of muscle mass every single decade, and that rate does not stay gentle. It accelerates. By the time someone reaches their 60s and 70s, the pace of loss can double or even triple compared to their 30s and 40s. Nobody feels this in real time. It is not like gaining weight, where a mirror or a waistband gives you a clue. Muscle loss is silent, gradual, and cumulative, which is exactly what makes it dangerous. You cannot fight an enemy you cannot see, and for most of human history, we simply accepted this decline as an unavoidable part of aging. But that assumption is where the real story begins to shift, because in the last 2 decades, exercise physiologists and geriatric researchers have discovered something remarkable. Sarcopenia is not purely a product of time. It is, in large part, a product of disuse. Muscle tissue is one of the most metabolically demanding, adaptive systems in the human body, and it operates on a brutally simple principle. Use it, and the body invests in maintaining it. Stop using it, and the body begins reclaiming those resources for something else. This is cruelty. It is fishy. Your body does not know the difference between a muscle you are choosing not to use and a muscle you no longer need. This is why the story of leg muscle loss in older adults is so often tied to something deceptively small: the quiet retreat from movement that happens after retirement, after an injury, after a long winter spent mostly indoors, after the subtle decision to take the elevator instead of the stairs one more time. None of these choices feel dangerous in the moment, but muscle does not forgive slowly accumulated stillness. And once a certain threshold of loss is crossed, a second, more frightening process begins. Weak leg muscles do not just make walking harder. They change the way the entire body balances, reacts, and protects itself. The quadriceps, hamstrings, and calf muscles are not just for movement. They are the body's emergency response system. When you trip on an uneven sidewalk, it is not your brain that saves you in that split second. There is no time for conscious thought. It is the reflexive, split-second contraction of leg muscle fibers that catches your weight and prevents a fall. According to data tracked by the CDC, Falls remain one of the leading causes of injury-related hospitalization among adults over 65. And a significant portion of those falls are directly linked to reduced lower body strength. This is the hidden cost of sarcopenia. It is not just about how far you can walk. It is about whether your body can save you when it matters most. And here is where the story takes an unexpected turn, because if muscle loss were purely inevitable, purely written into our genetic code with no room for intervention, this would be a much shorter and much sadder story. But it isn't. Multiple clinical studies, including research published in journals focused on geriatric medicine, have shown that resistance-based movement, even in their 70s, 80s, and beyond, can measurably rebuild muscle fiber, improve strength, and in some cases partially reverse the functional decline associated with sarcopenia. Muscle tissue retains what researchers call plasticity well into old age. It is not a closed door. It is a door that simply stops being opened. So the real question is not whether muscle loss can be addressed. It can. The real question is when and how, and this is where the story turns toward the morning. Because the way your body begins its day may matter more than most people ever consider. Think about what happens to your legs overnight. For 7 or 8 hours, they are almost completely still. Circulation slows. Muscle fibers, tendons, and connective tissue cool and stiffen slightly, the way a rubber band left untouched in a cold room loses some of its flexibility. Blood flow to the extremities naturally decreases during deep sleep, prioritizing the core organs instead. This is normal, and it is not something to fear, but it does mean that the first movements of the day are not neutral. They are either an opportunity to gently reawaken the muscular and circulatory systems, or they are a missed window that gets skipped entirely in the rush of coffee, medication schedules, and morning routines. This is the piece so many people overlook, not because they don't care about their health, but because nobody ever explained why the first few minutes after waking carry so much physiological weight. A short, deliberate sequence of movement in the morning, something that exercising later in the day cannot fully replicate. It interrupts the overnight stiffening process at its earliest point, before compensatory patterns set in, before the body has already adjusted to a day of minimal use. It is, in a very real sense, sending the body a signal, an early morning message that says these muscles are still needed, still valued, still part of the plan. What does this actually look like in practice? Not an intense workout. Not something requiring equipment, a gym membership, or even leaving the bedroom. The research on functional mobility consistently points toward a small set of low-impact, high-value movements performed consistently, movements that emphasize the exact muscle groups most responsible for balance and independence, the quadriceps that stabilize the knee, the glutes that support hip alignment, and the calves that control ankle strength and walking rhythm. Consider something as simple as seated leg extensions, performed slowly while still sitting on the edge of the bed. This movement directly targets the quadriceps, the muscle group most responsible for the ability to stand up from a chair without using your arms for support, an ability that geriatric researchers actually use as a clinical marker of functional independence. If a person can rise from a seated position 5 times in a row without pushing off with their hands, it is considered a meaningful indicator of preserved lower body strength. That is not small detail. That single test, sit to stand, repeated, is used in real clinical settings to predict fall risk and independence outcomes, and the muscle strength behind it can be built with movement this simple. Then there is ankle pumping and calf raises, movements that seem almost too modest to matter, and yet they play an outsized role in circulation. The calf muscles are sometimes referred to by researchers as the body's second heart, because their contraction helps pump blood back up through the legs against gravity. For older adults, particularly those who spend more time seated or resting, this circulatory support becomes even more important, reducing the risk of blood pooling, swelling, and the kind of stiffness that makes the first steps of the day feel unstable. And finally, something as unassuming as marching in place, lifting the knees gently while holding onto a chair or countertop for balance, activates the hip flexors and core stabilizing muscles simultaneously, rebuilding the coordinated firing pattern between upper leg and torso that so often deteriorates quietly with age. This coordination, more than raw strength alone, is what allows a person to navigate uneven ground, recover from a stumble, or step off a curb with confidence instead of hesitation. What makes this approach so different from the advice most people have already heard is not the movements themselves, it is the timing and the psychology behind consistency. Behavioral research on habit formation consistently shows that actions anchored to an existing daily routine, something you already do without fail, are far more likely to become permanent than actions that require a separate decision each day. Brushing your teeth, waiting for coffee to brew, sitting on the edge of the bed before standing. These are moments that already happen every single morning, which makes them powerful anchors for a new movement habit, because the decision to has already been made for you by your own routine. This matters more for older adults specifically because willpower, contrary to popular belief, is not a fixed reserve of discipline. It is a limited cognitive resource that fluctuates throughout the day and is often lowest in the evening. This is part of why so many well-intentioned exercise plans, the ones scheduled for after dinner or before bed, quietly fail over time. The morning, by contrast, tends to offer the highest levels of mental clarity and motivation before the demands of the day accumulate. Pairing a small physical practice with that natural morning clarity is not a coincidence. It is a strategy grounded in behavioral science. There is also an emotional dimension to this that rarely gets discussed alongside the physical one. Muscle loss does not only threaten mobility, it threatens identity. For many older adults, the fear is rarely phrased directly, but it lives underneath conversations about health constantly. The fear of becoming a burden, the fear of losing the ability to live independently, the fear of a future where someone else has to help with tasks that once required no thought at all. This fear is not irrational. It is a rational response to a very real biological process. But it is also, crucially, a fear that can be addressed, not through denial, but through informed, consistent, small action, the kind that rebuilds not just muscle fiber but confidence in the body's ability to keep showing up. This is perhaps the most important reframe in the entire conversation around sarcopenia. The goal is not to chase the strength of a 25-year-old. That was never the point, and framing it that way only invites discouragement. The goal is to preserve what researchers call functional capacity, the specific practical strength to live the life you actually want to live, to carry your own groceries, to play with a grandchild on the floor and get back up without help, to travel without dreading airport terminals and long walks, to trust your own legs in a crowded space, on a wet sidewalk, on an unfamiliar staircase. And the evidence increasingly suggests that this preservation is available to nearly everyone willing to engage with it consistently, regardless of when they start. Studies on resistance training in adults over 75 have shown measurable improvements in strength and mobility markers within as little as 8 to 12 weeks of consistent, low-intensity practice. This is not a decade-long project. It is a matter of showing up in small ways, morning after morning, and allowing the body's remarkable adaptive capacity to do the rest. There is something quietly powerful in recognizing that the body you have right now, at whatever age you are hearing this, still has the capacity to respond, to adapt, to rebuild. That capacity does not vanish on a birthday. It fades only in the absence of a signal telling it that it is still needed. Every seated leg extension, every gentle calf raise, every slow march in place beside the bed is, in its own small way, that signal sent first thing in the morning, before the day has a chance to get in the way. So the real story here was never really about muscle at all. It was about attention, about noticing something the body does silently, without complaint, until the moment it can no longer keep pace with the life you want to live. The leg muscles carrying you through your mornings today are the same ones that will determine how freely you move through the years ahead, and the difference between decline and preservation often comes down to something this unremarkable, this achievable, and this quietly powerful. A few minutes, chosen deliberately, right at the start of the day, before anything else has the chance to compete for your attention. Because in the end, the most important health decisions rarely announce themselves as important. They look, in the moment, like nothing more than sitting on the edge of a bed, lifting a leg, and choosing one more morning to remind your body that it still has somewhere to go.